I was stationed to dig wells in Latin America, and from the first night, I knew something was wrong with the earth beneath my feet. You don't get sent out here unless you're expendable. That's the truth nobody says aloud. Contractors like me, we're ghosts before we even disappear. They send us into forgotten villages, patchwork settlements, places you'll never find on a map. The government pays us in cash, promises us food, a cot, and a plane. Ticket home once the work is done. Simple deal. Except it never is. The jungle here doesn't breathe like other jungles. It swallows. The air doesn't just press against your skin. It sinks into you, damp and heavy, until your bones feel waterlogged. Even the birds, when they call, sound like they're warning each other instead of singing. I remember standing by the half-assembled rig that first night, staring at the tree line. The shadows there didn't move right. They didn't sway with the wind because there was no wind. The trees stood perfectly still, but the dark between them seemed to pulse. I told myself it was exhaustion. I'd been awake nearly 30 hours, riding old trucks and bouncing along dirt roads that weren't really roads at all. But even through the blur of fatigue, I could feel something watching me. You ever have that itch between your shoulders that makes you swear someone's eyes are locked on you? That was the jungle's first gift to me. The village chief was an old man with cataract-clouded eyes. He didn't smile when we shook hands. He just gripped my wrist, tight as iron, and whispered something low in Spanish. My Spanish isn't perfect, but I caught enough. The ground is not yours. I laughed it off in front of the crew. Later, lying on my cot, those words kept circling in my head like flies around a wound. Not yours. Not ours. His tone wasn't protective. It was resigned. Like he'd already lost someone to whatever he was warning me about. By morning, we started drilling. The rig tore into the red earth, coughing up mud and stone. The noise carried across the village like gunfire. Kids watched us from doorways, wide-eyed and silent, as if the machine was doing violence to something sacred. 12 meters down, we hit our first pocket of water. It should have been a victory. Instead, the drill shuddered and kicked back so hard, one of the crew, Mateo, nearly lost his hand. When we pulled the bit back up, the steel was gouged, like something had scraped along it from below. Metal doesn't scar like that. Not from mud, not from rock. Mateo spat and crossed himself. Nobody spoke. Nobody wanted to be the first to say what we all thought. That something had clawed the drill from inside the earth. I told myself it was a fluke. Just bad luck. But I couldn't explain the sound. As the drill came up, I swear I heard it. A low, wet hiss, curling out of the borehole like steam. Too faint for anyone else, maybe, but my ears locked onto it. A sound that didn't belong to the wind or the water. That night, I dreamed of tunnels, narrow, slick walls pressing against my ribs. The deeper I crawled, the louder the hissing became, until it filled my skull. When I woke, my shirt was soaked through with sweat, and my fingernails were packed with dirt. Real dirt. As if I'd been clawing at the earth in my sleep. I didn't tell anyone. You keep things like that to yourself out here. Men don't talk about dreams. Men don't talk about fear. But I couldn't shake the taste in my mouth. A sour, coppery tang, like blood diluted in river water. The next day, the chief came again. He didn't approach the rig. He stood just far enough away that the noise drowned out his words. Still, I watched his lips. He kept repeating the same phrase, over and over. I didn't need to hear it to know. Stop, stop, stop. I wanted to stop. God help me, I did. But contracts don't bend to superstition. Orders come from men who never set foot in the jungle. Men who don't have to stare into holes that breathe. We drilled deeper, 20 meters, 25. The mud that came up wasn't the same red earth as before. It was darker, blacker, oily almost, with a smell like rot. When the sun hit it, it glistened, and I swear it moved, as if something inside was alive and writhing. The villagers began to vanish from the edge of camp. At first, just the kids stopped watching us. Then the women disappeared. By the fourth day, the streets were empty, doors barred, windows shuttered. Only the old chief remained, sitting cross-legged near the well, eyes fixed on the hole like it was a coffin. I couldn't ignore it anymore. Something was waiting under us. Not water, not rock. Something that had been buried too long. And on the fifth night, I heard it move. It started as a vibration, deep in the ground. At first I thought it was the rig, maybe some loose gear rattling in the night. But the engine was silent, and the men were asleep. The sound came from beneath, a slow, steady tremor that seemed to hum against the bones of my feet. Then came the breath. That's the only way I can describe it. The hole exhaled. A hot draft surged up from the bore, thick and wet, carrying with it the stench of rotting vegetation. Imagine a swamp drained of sunlight, left to stew in its own decay. That was the smell. I gagged into my sleeve, boinking against the sting in my eyes. The jungle, usually alive with insects and frogs, had gone dead silent. That silence scared me more than the breath itself. Even predators make noise. But this was the sound of everything hiding at once. I woke Mateo first. He cursed when he smelled it, then shook the others awake. One by one, the crew gathered around the hole, squinting into the dark, as if we expected to see something rise. None of us said the word that sat heavy in all our throats: alive. When the draft died down, we told ourselves it was nothing, just trapped gas. That's what we agreed on out loud anyway. But I saw the doubt in their eyes, the way they lingered at the edge of camp until dawn, unwilling to lie back down. The chief was gone by morning. His place by the well sat empty, but in the dirt where he'd been, there was something drawn in ash. A spiral, coiled tight, ending in a sharp point. Not words, not letters. A warning carved by someone who didn't believe warnings would be enough. Mateo refused to work that day. He said his dreams had been filled with whispers, voices too low to catch, but close enough to burn, in his ears. The others mocked him until they saw the blood. Thin trails leaked from both his ears, drawing down his jaw. He hadn't noticed until we pointed it out. We should have stopped. God knows we should have. But fear makes men stubborn. The harder the jungle pressed on us, the more we clung to our orders. So we drilled again. 30 meters. The rig groaned and howled, shaking like it might tear itself apart. The mud we hauled up this time wasn't mud at all. It was thick, fibrous, stringy like old muscle tissue. The stench made one of the crew vomit. We scraped it into barrels, telling ourselves it was roots, just roots, but it felt warm, as if it had come from a body. That night, I walked the perimeter alone. I wanted to believe I still had some control over my fear. The moon was high, silver light cutting through the canopy, and for a moment, the jungle seemed calm. Then I saw the trees. The ones closest to camp were bowed inward, their trunks bending like supplicants around the borehole. I touched one, and the bark was slick. Not with rain. There hadn't been rain for days, but with a thin film of something that smelled like the black mud. My hand burned afterward, red welts rising across my skin. I didn't tell the others. Fear spreads faster than fire in places like this. But I washed my hand until the skin was raw and the smell still clung. By the fourth night, sleep was impossible. I lay awake, listening. The ground had shifted at odd hours, as if something enormous was turning beneath us. Sometimes it was faint, almost imagined. Other times, the vibrations rattled the cot frame. And always came that hissing breath, rising from the hole like some buried thing drawing air for the first time in centuries. On the fifth night, it spoke. Not words, not exactly. But as I lay there, staring at the canvas ceiling of the tent, I heard it whisper through the earth. A cadence, a rhythm, my name, over and over, stretching my syllables into something serpentine. I bolted upright, heart hammering. The others stirred, muttering in their sleep, but none woke. None of them heard it. Just me. Why me? That question still gnaws at me, because the answer came too late. I stumbled out of the tent, barefoot, drawn to the borehole as if pulled by a tether. The night air was thick, humid, clinging to my skin like sweat. The hole yawned before me, rim glistening with moisture, darker than the dark around it. I swear I could see it breathing. A faint expansion, a contraction, like the rise and fall of lungs. My feet stopped inches from the edge. My body wanted to lean forward, to peer down, to give myself over to whatever waited. My mind screamed against it. I swayed there, caught between the pull and the scream, until something snapped me back. The faint crunch of footsteps behind me. I spun, expecting one of the crew, but the man standing there wasn't one of us. He was tall, skin stretched tight over bones like parchment, clothes hanging in tatters. His eyes glowed faintly in the moonlight, cataract clouded, just like the chief's. Except this wasn't the chief. This face was younger, sharper, until he smiled and his jaw unhinged wider than it should, cracking at the corners. I stumbled back. My heel slipped on the mud, and for a heartbeat, I thought I'd fall in. But the figure didn't move closer. He just pointed at the hole, arm trembling, mouth still stretched in that silent, impossible smile. Then he was gone. Just gone. No sound, no retreat. One blink, he was there. The next, there was only jungle. I didn't sleep after that. I sat with my back against the tent pole, watching the hole until dawn, trying to convince myself I'd hallucinated. But when the sun rose, I saw it in the dirt where he'd stood. A single deep groove, like a dragged claw, pointing straight at the well. And that night, one of my men vanished. The man who vanished was Diego. He was the youngest of us, barely 21, cocky in that way young men are when they think sweat and jokes make them immortal. He wasn't just gone when we woke. His cot was empty, the blanket tossed aside like he'd stood up in the middle of the night and walked out. No footprints in the dirt, no trail, just absence. We tore through camp calling his name. Mateo shouted until his throat cracked. The others cursed and kicked through brush, their fear spilling out as anger. But I knew before we even searched, Diego hadn't left. He'd been taken. We found one thing, his boots. They sat neatly by the rig, laces undone, like he'd stopped to unlace them before climbing into bed. Except he hadn't. He'd gone to sleep wearing them. I'd seen it myself. The hole sat there, dark and damp, as if it knew we'd notice. And the air? God, the air. It smelled of wet stone and copper, like a riverbed after a flood. We argued about leaving. Mateo swore we had to pack up before the jungle swallowed more of us. Another man, Ramos, refused. He said if we abandoned the rig, we'd never get paid. And without pay, we might as well be dead anyway. The fight ended in fists until exhaustion smothered it. That night, I took first watch. My eyes burned, but I forced myself to sit by the borehole. Lantern flickering weakly at my side. Hours dragged. The jungle hummed with its strange silence. My thoughts twisted. I kept staring into the hole, wondering if Diego was down there. Wondering if maybe he was still alive. Around midnight, the earth shifted again. A ripple ran through the ground, like a giant rolling beneath the soil. The lantern flame guttered, and then I saw it. Movement. Not Diego. Not any man. Something pale slid against the borehole wall, just for an instant, before slipping back into the dark. Smooth, glistening, too thick to be any snake I knew. It made no sound, but I swear the ground vibrated harder when it touched the edges, like the earth itself shuddered away from it. I staggered back, nearly knocking the lantern over. My shout woke the others. They gathered, half asleep, but when I told them what I'd seen, their faces hardened. None of them wanted to believe me. Maybe I didn't want to believe myself, but in the dirt by my feet, something new gleamed. A scale. It was longer than my hand, curved like polished glass, edges sharp enough to cut. In the lantern light, it shimmered faintly, not with color, but with depth, like staring into water at night. When Mateo reached to touch it, his fingers split open before he even pressed down. The scale had sliced him like a razor. We buried it in the jungle, far from camp, without a word. No one wanted that thing near us. But I knew. Scales shed because the body beneath is growing. By dawn, the villagers returned. Not all of them, just a handful of women and children. They didn't come close. They stood at the tree line, silent, watching us with wide eyes. Their faces weren't angry anymore. They were grieving. They looked at us like men look at coffins. I went to them, against the protests of my crew. My Spanish stumbled, but I asked about the hole, about what they knew. None answered. The children hid their faces. One woman, younger than the rest, whispered a single word. Culebra. Snake. The word clawed at my chest. I wanted to laugh, to dismiss it. But when I turned back toward camp, toward the borehole yawning in the dirt, the laugh died in my throat. Because in that moment, I believed her. That evening, another crew member went missing, Ramos. Unlike Diego, his cot was still made. His tools were missing too, like he'd taken them and wandered off. But Ramos wasn't the type to wander. And when we found his hammer by the edge of the hole, bent nearly in half like soft clay, none of us could keep pretending. Mateo snapped first. He screamed at the others, ranted about devils and curses, threw his gear into a bag and swore he was leaving. He made it 10 steps toward the jungle before he stopped dead. I'll never forget that. 1 second, he was storming off, shoulders rigid. The next, his whole body froze like a statue. I called his name. He didn't answer. Then, he began to move, not forward, not backward, but sideways, slow and unnatural, as though something unseen had looped a hook through his ribs and was dragging him. His eyes rolled toward us, wide with terror, his lips moving silently. We rushed him, grabbed his arms, pulled. For a moment, we held him. But the pull on the other side was stronger. Mateo's body wrenched from our grip so violently, he dislocated his shoulder. His scream cut through the jungle before his body was yanked straight into the borehole. Gone, just like that. We stood there, panting, sweating, cursing. Not one of us dared step closer. The hole was silent again, as if it hadn't just swallowed a man whole. Only the lantern beside it flickered, casting shadows that seemed to coil and twist across the dirt. No one spoke until morning. And even then, the only words we shared were the ones we couldn't keep inside. We had to leave, but the rig wouldn't start. Every wire was intact, every valve tight, every bolt in place. I checked myself, hands trembling, but it was all perfect. Still, when I turned the key, the engine only wheezed. Not broken, paralyzed. That's when I understood. We weren't leaving, not until whatever waited below decided we could. And that night, I finally saw its eyes. I didn't want to keep watch anymore. None of us did. But we rotated anyway, because the fear of being alone in our tents was worse. That night it was my turn again. The jungle fell swollen with silence, as if every leaf was holding its breath. I sat with my lantern and tried not to look at the hole. Tried. My eyes kept dragging back, as if the darkness there was heavier than all the rest. I don't know how long I sat before I noticed the glow. At first, I thought the lantern was flickering wrong. Then I realized it wasn't the lantern. It was the hole. 2 faint circles of light, low and wide, pulsed from the dark below. Eyes. They were huge, far too large to belong to anything that should have fit inside the borehole. Yet they were there, shimmering faintly like moonlight on oil. They didn't blink. They didn't move. They just stared up at me. My chest tightened. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The world shrank to those 2 points of light, locking me in place like prey caught in a predator's gaze. Then it hissed, not the faint breath we'd heard before. This was a roar of air, a furious exhalation that shook the ground beneath me and sent the lantern tumbling over. Its flame guttered out, the camp went black. I screamed for the others, but my voice felt swallowed by the dark. Something shifted below, something massive, dragging against the earth. The hole widened. I swear to God it did. Dirt sloughed inward, like the ground was being pulled open from beneath. The others burst from their tents, shouting, their faces pale in the moonlight. They saw the eyes too. I'll never forget the way their voices stuttered, words collapsing into raw sounds of terror. And then the ground cracked. The borehole split wider with a deep, groaning moan. I saw scales again, dozens this time, sliding like armored plates beneath loose soil. A body too vast to comprehend, coiled and uncoiled far below. Its bulk, pressing the ground up in ridges as it moved. Mateo had been right. This wasn't gas, wasn't rock, wasn't anything that could be measured or mapped. This was alive, and it was waking. We grabbed our gear, desperate to do something, anything. Ramos muttered prayers. Another man fired his pistol into the hole, bullets sparking against scales with a sound like striking stone. The eyes vanished, but not because the shots hit. They vanished because the thing had sunk deeper. The silence that followed was worse than the noise, like the pause before lightning. We stayed huddled together until sunrise, none of us daring to close our eyes. When morning came, we told ourselves maybe it had gone. Maybe the noise and light had driven it away. But the earth around camp told another story. Cracks radiated from the borehole like veins. Trees along the edge of camp were toppled, roots snapped upward, as if something enormous had passed beneath and torn them from the ground. Still, we stayed, because what else could we do? The jungle stretched for days in every direction. No trucks, no radio, no way out. And the rig, our only connection to the outside, was still dead. By afternoon, the heat grew unbearable. The oily mud from the hole hadn't dried. It steamed, curling up in foul wisps that smelled of iron and bile. Flies swarmed it, but none landed. They circled, whining, then fled, as if even insects knew better. We argued again. One man insisted we try walking back to the road, even if it took days. Another swore leaving the hole unguarded would only make things worse. I said nothing. My eyes kept drifting to the spiral the chief had drawn in ash, etched now into my memory. A serpent coiled, patient, waiting. That night, the voices started, not whispers this time, clearer, louder. They rose with the breath from the borehole, curling into our tents like smoke. Words in a language none of us knew, yet somehow we understood. Promises, threats, a hunger disguised as welcome. I stuffed cloth into my ears, but the sound slid through, vibrating inside my skull. One of the men tore at his tent, screaming, clawing at his head as if he could rip the voices out. We tried to hold him down, but he was too strong, thrashing like a man drowning. Then, just like Mateo, he was dragged. Not into the hole this time, into the ground itself. The soil beneath him buckled, split, and his body sank, screaming until the earth swallowed him whole. No trace left but a collapse of dirt slowly filling in. We didn't move after that. Couldn't. Fear pinned us like insects to a board. Somehow, I slept. Don't ask me how. Exhaustion overcame terror, and when I woke, the sun was already high. My throat was dry, my body shaking. For a brief, stupid moment, I thought maybe it had been a dream. Until I saw the tracks. They circled our camp, gouges in the dirt like trenches, wide and deep, pressed with the unmistakable pattern of scales. Each loop drew closer, spiraling inward, tighter and tighter, until the last ring stopped just a few feet from my tent. The serpent hadn't left. It had measured us. That night, the eyes came back, closer this time. The eyes burned brighter than before, not glowing like fire, but shimmering like wet stone catching moonlight. They hovered at the lip of the hole now, not far below, close enough that the reflection gleamed in the whites of our own eyes when we stared too long. I couldn't look away. My chest tightened with the weight of their gaze, like invisible coils wrapping around my ribs. Each second stretched longer until I couldn't remember what life had felt like before this moment. Only staring, only being stared at. One of the men broke first. He screamed at it, voice cracking, and hurled a lantern down the hole. The flame vanished in the dark, but the oil splashed. For a heartbeat, fire licked against scales. I saw them clearly then, dark as obsidian, each the size of a man's head, edges catching light like blades. The serpent moved. The ground shook violently, throwing us off our feet. The rig toppled, metal shrieking as it crashed to the dirt. The borehole widened again, spraying clumps of soil outward. We scrambled, crawling, trying to put distance between ourselves and that impossible opening. Then, silence. The eyes had vanished. The ground lay still. It was almost worse than the quake. Waiting for what would come next, praying it would be nothing. But something had changed. The jungle was alive again. Birds shrieked, monkeys howled, insects screamed. Not natural noise, panic. Every living thing seemed to cry out at once, the air trembling with a collective terror. And then, as if ripped away, the cacophony stopped. We didn't sleep. Couldn't. We sat back to back, weapons clutched, lanterns lit, waiting. Time bled into itself until dawn came gray and weak. When the light spread, we saw the trees. Hundreds of them, surrounding the camp, were stripped bare. Their bark shredded in long spirals, sap bleeding in streams. The patterns were too precise to be storm damage. Each spiral matched the ash mark the chief had left behind. And at the center of camp, laid neatly beside the ore hole, was Diego. At least it looked like Diego. His body was whole, clothes intact, no signs of struggle. But his eyes, they were empty. Not just lifeless, hollow. Pits of wet black where his pupils should have been. He didn't breathe. His chest didn't rise. Yet his lips twitched, curved. A faint, awful smile. No one moved closer. No one touched him. We left him there all day, sitting cross-legged by the hole, like a guardian. By nightfall, he was gone again. This time we heard him leave. A dragging sound across the dirt, like something heavy being pulled. None of us dared to check until morning. When we finally stepped outside, there were no footprints, just a long groove leading from the camp straight into the jungle. We were breaking. Fear makes men turn on each other, and it didn't take long. Ramos accused me of leading them to this place. Said I must have known what we were digging into. His spit hit the dirt inches from my boots. Another man sided with him. Knives came out. I don't know how it would have ended, if not for the sound. A crack, low and distant, echoing from the earth. Then another, closer. The ground between us split open like fabric tearing. Thin lines zigzagging outward from the borehole. Steam rose from the fractures, carrying that same stench of rot and copper. We forgot our fight. We just ran. Not away. Where would we go? We ran circles in camp, shouting, hauling gear, trying to keep ahead of the cracks as they split beneath our feet. Dirt collapsed. One man's leg plunged thigh deep before he was yanked free, skin scraped raw from the bite of the earth. The cracks stopped suddenly, sealing shut, as if they'd never been there. The jungle grew quiet again, but that night, something came out of the hole. It wasn't the serpent, not all of it anyway, just a fragment, a projection maybe, of what lay below. We heard the hiss first, louder than ever, a searing blast of air that rattled our bones. Then the ground at the hole's edge bulged upward. From the dirt rose something like a tongue, or maybe an arm. It was pale, slick, muscular, covered in ridges that pulsed faintly with each movement. The thing stretched, curling through the camp, brushing against tents and gear. Everything it touched wilted, rotting instantly. We fired at it. Bullets sank into flesh with dull thuds. No blood. The wounds closed immediately, skin knitting together like it had never been pierced. The limb, or whatever it was, swept across the ground, slow but deliberate, tasting us. One man was too slow to move. It brushed against his boot, and his body stiffened instantly. He fell backward, screaming, but the scream choked off. His skin darkened, veins bulging black, spreading across his body in seconds. By the time we reached him, he was gone. Not dead, gone. His body collapsed into a husk of dust and skin, caving inward. The limb withdrew, slid back into the borehole like it had never been there. We didn't speak that night. None of us had words left. When dawn came, the jungle was different. The air itself felt warped, denser, colors sharper and wrong. The leaves too green, the dirt too red. My head throbbed just looking at it. I thought maybe I'd lost my mind until I saw the others rubbing their eyes, shaking their heads. We all felt it. The serpent wasn't just beneath us anymore. It was changing the world around us. And the worst part? The more it changed, the more I felt it inside me. A pressure, a pull, as if some part of me was already bound to it. That was when I realized something I wish I hadn't. It didn't want to kill us. Not yet. It wanted to keep us. I don't know when I stopped counting the days. Time bled into a fever dream. Sunlight didn't feel like sunlight anymore. It carried no warmth, just a pale glow that made the jungle look painted, unreal. Nights were worse. Nights belonged to it. I couldn't sleep. None of us could. Every time I shut my eyes, I felt it slithering behind them, coiling tighter. Dreams weren't dreams anymore. They were places inside the earth. Tunnels that seemed to stretch forever. Walls slick with a sheen that pulsed like veins. I'd crawl, and then I'd see light ahead. But it wasn't an exit. It was the eyes, waiting for me, patient, eternal. When I woke, I'd be drenched, gasping like I'd surfaced from drowning. Sometimes I'd find dirt under my nails. Sometimes my boots were wet, though I hadn't moved from my cot. The others noticed. They noticed everything. My silence, my shaking hands, the way I'd stare too long at the hole. They thought I was losing it. And maybe I was. But they were too. We just showed it in different ways. Ramos barely spoke anymore. He sat near the edge of camp, carving spirals into his own arm with a knife. Shallow cuts that bled just enough to paint his skin. When I tried to stop him, he whispered that the serpent liked it, that he could feel its approval when he bled. Another man had stopped eating. He just sat, lips cracked, eyes glassy, muttering prayers to a god that felt very far away. I wanted to scream at them, shake them, remind them that we were still men, but my voice stayed trapped in my chest, because I couldn't convince myself either. The serpent was winning. That night, it came closer than ever. I was standing guard when the ground trembled, not violently, just a low rumble, steady as a heartbeat. The borehole steamed. Then, slowly, scales broke the surface, Not the eyes, not the tongue, the body. It slid upward, slow and immense, ridges scraping dirt as it emerged. The scale plates shone slick and black, each larger than my torso. The serpent's girth filled the borehole completely, and still more of it pressed upward, rising impossibly endless. I should have run, should have fired, should have screamed, but I didn't. I just watched, paralyzed, as a section of its body slid higher than the camp, blotting out the moonlight. Then it stopped, hung there, looming, a tower of living muscle. I felt its weight without it even moving, pressing down on us like gravity had thickened. The others came stumbling out of their tents, half awake, half mad. Ramos dropped to his knees, arms outstretched as if welcoming a god. The man who'd stopped eating began to laugh, a high, broken sound that made my stomach turn. The serpent didn't strike. It didn't need to. It simply leaned forward, lowering its vast head from the shadows. And for the first time, I saw its mouth. Not fangs, not jaws, a split that opened far too wide, stretching back into endless black, lined with rows of teeth that shimmered like glass shards. The hiss that poured out of it wasn't sound alone. It was pressure, vibration, a force that rattled my bones and made my vision blur. I clamped my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. The hiss was inside me. It whispered in a cadence I couldn't resist. Join, become, be still. I think I blacked out. I don't know for how long. When I woke, the serpent was gone. The others lay scattered, twitching in the dirt like broken marionettes. Ramos was smiling through tears. The laughing man was silent, but his lips still moved, forming words he no longer had breath to speak. I tried to shake them awake, tried to drag them back into the tents, but every time I touched them, I felt something under their skin, something moving, crawling. As if tiny coils had already burrowed inside, making them less mine, less human. That night, I didn't dare sleep. I sat by the dying embers of the fire, watching shadows writhe across the ground, even when nothing moved. My heartbeat didn't feel like my own anymore. It throbbed with the rhythm of the earth. And then I heard it. Not the serpent, not the hiss. A voice, my mother's. She called my name, clear as day, from the jungle, beyond the camp. My chest cracked open with longing. I hadn't heard her voice in years. She'd been dead for half of my life. Yet here it was, tender, pleading, familiar. I stood without thinking. My legs carried me toward the trees. Slow, dazed, each step sank deeper into the mud, but I didn't stop. Her voice beckoned, soft and sweet, promising rest, promising home. I was 3 steps into the jungle when something cold grazed my ankle. I looked down. It was a hand. Diego's hand. He was half buried in the soil, face tilted up toward me, eyes hollow pits, lips stretched in that same awful smile. His grip tightened on my ankle, weak but enough to root me in place. His mouth opened, soil spilling from his teeth as he whispered, "Don't." The voice in the jungle cut off instantly. The silence that followed was heavier than any hiss, pressing down on my chest until I nearly fainted. I stumbled back, wrenching free from Diego's grip. His body collapsed into the dirt, sinking as though it had never been there at all. I didn't go back to the tents. I couldn't. I just stood there until the sun finally clawed its way over the trees. When daylight came, 2 more of my men were gone. By then, I was the only one pretending we still had a camp. The tent sagged, half buried in vines. The fire pit was just a black ring of ash. The generator had gone silent days ago, swallowed by humidity and neglect. Every trace of order had rotted. And the men, what was left of them, were shadows, drifting where the serpent willed them. I tried to fight it. I forced myself to eat, to drink, to keep my rifle cleaned. But even those small rituals felt pointless, like I was polishing a toy in the belly of a grave. The jungle around us changed. Or maybe it had always been this way, and I was just seeing it now. The trees seemed closer, bending inward, their trunks warped into twisting shapes that mirrored the serpent's coils. Roots pushed through the soil like ribs, cracking underfoot with a sound too much like breaking bones. Even the air smelled wrong, wet and metallic, like rusting iron and old blood. At night, the noises grew unbearable, the hissing, the grinding scales, the wet slap of something immense moving through mud. But the worst were the voices. They no longer whispered from the jungle. They whispered inside camp, inside our heads. Ramos stopped sleeping entirely. He wandered from tent to tent, carving spirals into anything he could find. Wood, canvas, skin. His arms were a mess of shallow cuts, scabbing into patterns I couldn't understand. When I begged him to stop, he turned to me, eyes sunken, voice hoarse. "It's not cutting," he whispered. "It's writing. It's teaching me the shape." The shape, the spiral. I saw it everywhere. In the mud that dried on my boots, in the smoke from the fire, in the movements of the serpent when it slithered beneath the earth, always circling, tightening, drawing inward. One night, Ramos vanished, not into the jungle, down. I woke to the sound of digging. I found him kneeling by the borehole, fingers clawing dirt like a man possessed. His hands bled, nails torn away, but he kept scraping, whispering, "Almost there, almost there." I tried to pull him back, but he was strong, stronger than he had any right to be. The ground trembled beneath us, and suddenly the soil gave way. Ramos fell first. He didn't scream. He didn't even flinch. Just let the darkness take him. I should have run. Should have left him to whatever fate waited below. But my body betrayed me. My hands clung to the edge, peering down. I saw him, for just a second. He wasn't falling. He was floating, cradled in coils that shimmered in the dark, scales slick with wet light. And he was smiling as the serpent's mouth opened beneath him, a black void lined with glistening teeth. Then the earth sealed over. The hole smoothed itself, as though nothing had happened. I lay there until dawn, shaking, dirt caked under my nails, breath ragged. By morning, only 2 men remained besides me. They sat at opposite ends of camp, not speaking, not eating, not acknowledging me. Their eyes followed the trees, darting at sounds only they could hear. They weren't soldiers anymore. They weren't men. They were husks, hollowed out by the serpent's whisper. I thought about running, just grabbing my pack and rifle, hacking through the jungle until I collapsed or found a road. But every time I tried, I felt it, the pull, the spiral tightening around me. My legs would buckle, my vision would blur, and always I'd hear the hiss in my chest, reminding me, There's nowhere else, only down. That night, I made a mistake. I lit the last of our fuel, desperate for light. A fire so bright, it painted the trees gold, burning hotter than anything we dared in weeks. For a while, it worked. The voices pulled back, the hissing quieted. I felt almost human again, clutching my rifle, warming my hands. But fire draws attention. The ground shook harder than it ever had. The men stirred, eyes rolling back, mouths twitching with silent prayer or hunger. I couldn't tell which. The jungle fell deathly quiet. Then the serpent rose, not from the borehole, from everywhere. The soil split open in half a dozen places, coils bursting upward, wet and glistening, curling through the camp like pillars. They pressed against the trees, bending them flat. They knocked tents aside like scraps of cloth. The fire guttered in their shadow. I froze, my rifle useless in my hands. One of the men dropped to his knees, arms outstretched, sobbing with joy. The other tried to run, but a coil swept across camp, pinning him against a tree. The crack of his bones echoed like gunfire, and then its head emerged. It dwarfed everything. Its scales were slick black, its eyes twin abysses that reflected nothing. It leaned into the firelight, mouth yawning open, rows of teeth gleamed. The hiss poured out, deafening, making the flames shiver. The man on his knees crawled forward, reaching for it like a child reaching for a parent. The serpent lowered its head and gently, almost tenderly, scooped him into its mouth. The firelight glowed against slick flesh, and then he was gone. The serpent turned to me. The hiss cut through my skull. My rifle slipped from my hands. My knees buckled. My vision blurred, spirals crawling at the edges of my sight. It leaned closer. I could smell it now. Damp earth, rot, the copper tang of blood. Its tongue flicked out, brushing the ground just inches from me. My whole body shook, teeth rattling in my jaw. And then it spoke. Not in words, in something deeper. The hiss shifted, layered with rhythm, with meaning. A voice without sound pressed straight into my marrow. Be still. Become. The earth is waiting. I don't remember collapsing, only waking hours later, face pressed into the dirt. The fire was gone. The serpent was gone. The last of my men were gone, and I was alone, or at least I wanted to believe I was, because when I staggered to the borehole, I saw it. Not darkness, not steam, but a shape, rising, slow and deliberate, from far below, and it was coming for me. I should have run. That's what you're thinking, isn't it? Pack up, hack through the trees, let the jungle kill me before the serpent could. But I didn't. I couldn't. It wasn't just fear that froze me. It was gravity. The closer it came, the heavier the world pressed down, like every bone in my body had been filled with lead. My breath rasped in shallow bursts. My heart thudded to a rhythm that wasn't mine anymore. The borehole widened as I watched. Soil crumbled inward, roots tearing free like snapped tendons. The earth groaned, and slowly, impossibly, the serpent rose. I saw more of it in that moment than ever before. Its coils unfurled, slick with slime, thick as towers, stretching up and up until they disappeared into the canopy. Its head emerged last, sliding into the open air with the grace of something eternal. Those eyes, bottomless, unblinking, locked on me. I don't remember lifting my rifle. I don't remember screaming. But my finger jerked the trigger until the magazine clicked empty. Bullets sparked against scales, harmless, like pebbles against a mountainside. The serpent didn't flinch, didn't bleed, didn't even seem to notice. It leaned closer, so close I could see my reflection in its eyes, a tiny man, trembling, already swallowed by the spiral. And then it opened its mouth. Darkness. Rows of teeth glistening like knives. A throat that seemed to stretch forever, deeper than any well, deeper than the earth itself. The hiss poured out in a single blast, shoving me back, rattling my skull. I stumbled, dropped the rifle. My ears rang, my vision blurred. I clawed at the ground, trying to anchor myself, but the hiss wasn't just sound anymore. It was thought. It was command. Be still. Become. The earth is waiting. I felt myself move, not by choice. My legs bent, my body rising, stumbling forward like a puppet on strings. My boots dragged across the soil, one step, then another, toward that waiting maw. Every instinct screamed against it. My throat tore with a hoarse cry, but the sound was nothing, a moth fluttering against thunder. I tried to dig my nails into my arms, to anchor myself in pain, but even that wasn't mine anymore. I was almost at the edge of its mouth when something shifted. A flicker, a memory. Diego, his hand clutching my ankle, his whisper. Faint but sharp. Dote. It cut through the hiss for a fraction of a second. Enough. I dropped to my knees, teeth clamped so hard I tasted blood. The serpent loomed above, waiting, patient, certain, and in that moment, I realized I couldn't fight it. Not with bullets, not with screams, not with prayer, but maybe I could deny it. I crawled backward, inch by inch, forcing my body against the pole. My nails tore, my knees bled. The hiss grew louder, furious, the earth trembling beneath me. But I didn't stop. I made it to the fire pit. Dead ash, still warm beneath my palms. I grabbed a half-burned branch and jammed it against my arm. Flesh seared. The smell of burning skin choked me, but the pain, it was mine. Real. Mine. The hiss faltered, just for a breath. I staggered to my feet, clutching the smoldering branch like a weapon, even though I knew it was nothing. My vision swam. My ears roared, but I screamed anyway, voice raw. You can't have me! The serpent reared back, coils thrashing, trees snapping like twigs under its weight. The hiss exploded, a sound so vast it blotted out thought, out identity, out everything. And then, silence. When I opened my eyes, the serpent was gone. The borehole was closed, smooth as untouched earth. The trees stood still. The jungle buzzed with ordinary life, birds, insects, the rustle of leaves. But I wasn't fooled. I staggered through the jungle for what felt like days, guided by nothing but desperation. Hunger gnawed, thirst clawed. But the serpent didn't chase me. It didn't need to. I finally stumbled onto a dirt road. A truck picked me up hours later. They said I was raving, half dead, skin burned, eyes wild. They rushed me to a hospital. I stayed there for weeks. The army called it abandonment of post. They said my men went missing, presumed dead, that I had no proof of anything. I was discharged quietly, left to rot on the edges of life. But it never left me. I hear the hiss when I close my eyes. I see spirals in cigarette smoke, in puddles, in the curl of a stranger's hair. My heartbeat isn't mine anymore. It belongs to the earth. And sometimes, when I wake in the middle of the night, my boots are wet. I've told you this because someone has to know. Because you think water is just water, that wells are just wells. You're wrong. The earth hides things older than God, and we've only ever scratched the surface. I escaped, if you want to call it that. But the serpent is still there, waiting, patient, eternal. And the next time someone digs too deep, it won't settle for whispers. It'll rise, and when it does, none of us will crawl out. I still dream of its mouth, opening wider than the sky. And every morning I wake a little closer to stepping inside.